next step is prompting, right? So obviously we need to have inputs. So it's important to have inputs. So if you look at the basics, right, we have to send some type of input to the model. And it's really all about the prompt. Okay. A really bad prompt is not going to create very nice things. So you have to be very, very specific. Okay. So this is where we get into structured instructions, right? We want to make things in points. How do we control that context? And we want the LLMs to break down tasks. This is really important. If it breaks down tasks, you have a higher chance that it would do what you want. Okay? So let's look at a little bit deeper into this prompt engineering, usually referred to as prompt engineering. I grabbed the main concepts that made sense to me. Structure and instruction design. This is important. You want to craft clear, precise queries towards a desired output. You have to be very specific. If not, you're giving the LLMs very, very big leeway of creativity to do things. And this is how you can reduce those hallucinations. All right, role prompting also, it's important, right? There's also a specific personas that are assigned to the different messages that are going to be going in and out. Context shaping, and this is important. This is basically when we can start doing injection of different types of context inside of your messages so the LLM can be informed of real-time activity, maybe RAG, augmentation, right? Vector searches, etc. Okay, so that's where context shaping comes in. There's also output control, right? We can actually tell the LLM that we want the output in specific formats, right? We can actually pass in a schema or a different shaping of the responses. And usually what this is referred to as chain of thought in tons of AI courses that you will find out there. It's basically just the idea that you want your models to show their step process. And this is important because, first of all, it helps with your context and really improves the accuracy and lowers hallucination. You'll see that the majority of the tools right now have a plan option. I really encourage you to start with planning mode so you can actually work on your context and come up with a nice plan instead of going into building mode and just not dealing with those steps and chain of thought. So always, if you're doing something big, go with the plans. Okay, multimodality. We talked about not only do we have text, but we're going to be dealing nowadays with images, with audio, with video, with music, etc. So important that text is not only the things that we work on. That's usually referred to as multimodality. Another word that you're going to start seeing, a buzzword that you see left and right being thrown everywhere, is RAG. And for me, I always think of a dirty rag. But it's not a dirty rag. It's basically Retrieval-Augmented Generation. And all it means, it basically gives AI access to relevant, up-to-date information. The LLM has been trained, like I said, on massive amounts of information, but it doesn't know real-time information. So somebody has to provide it. And this is basically a way that you can actually query a knowledge base. And this can be through traditional searches or what's called vector searches, which are mathematical computational search. Tons of databases out there that support vector searches as well, usually creating array embeddings for your data. And this augments the original prompt or your original query or question with that relevant data. And so imagine if you have a sales bot and you basically need to be able to do a search for PDF documents, and you need to be able to inject that information in so the LLM can process it. This is where RAG would come into place. So before you send things to the LLM, that's where RAG comes in. You get that information up to date, you inject it into your context questions, and boom, you send it back. And now the LLM can process everything factually. I love pictures. I'm a picture kind of guy. So I love this image. I can't remember where it was, but I need to put the reference later on. But just to follow it, like I mentioned again, we start with a query that you want to do into the LLM. But before we do that, we're going to have some type of retrieval. And this can be through another agent, actually, or it can be through your function calls. And this basically can go to different vector search engines, get information, create any kind of tooling, come back with that information, send it finally to that language model, and get your response. So that's when you hear RAG, that's all it's doing. It's augmenting basically your query so it can have real-time information. And then we get into memory. So the LLMs have no state. They have no persistence. Okay, they only take input and they predict. That's it. So every request is really a blank slate, right? So memory, also important, is not the same as history. Okay, this is something that you must implement. Okay, so you have to be able to send that conversation history back and forth, okay, to the LLM so it can actually distinguish the things. And that's where the context is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, so there's also the concepts of short-term memory, right, and long-term memory. Right? You can see nowadays that OpenAI and Claude have this concept of memory that when you enable it, right, you have long-term memory, right? You even have the ability to actually go into different chats and get information about different chats. Again, another type of augmentation through that memory. Okay. And that memory is stored somewhere. It's really up to you where do you store it, whether it's a long-term memory and it goes into a vector search, or it goes into a normal traditional RDBMS, etc. The majority of these chat engines that you see out there, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, etc., do this implementation for you. Let's talk about tools. And as developers, this is the area where we shine. So tooling is basically just the idea and the concept that the LLM would do function calls for you. And this is basically another type of augmentation, right? You make a request to the LLM detects that there's a function call. So the LLM returns a response back to the caller and says, hey, you need to call a function because I need that real-time data. And then your code will basically call a function, which can be search an MCP server, retrieve an order, read files, stop a server, start a server, execute SQL, etc. Once you execute that function call, you get the results, you send it back into the LLM for processing. That's pretty much all it does. Okay. So the concept of tools is very, very important when you start creating your own agents. And that's where we get into agents. Okay. So what are agents? We hear them everywhere. We hear them actually too much, right? Everything's an agent. So agents are autonomous. It's really just an autonomous control loop, okay, that orchestrates a bunch of all the stuff that we've discussed. That's basically its job. Its job is to be able to look at all the different components and say, hey, I have different types of memory. I have different vector databases. I have different tools. I can even have sub agents. I can have large language models that I can talk to because I can have more. I can do augmentation if I need to, et cetera, et cetera. So your AI agent becomes a huge orchestrator, right? And you configure it. And then it's up to you to basically to tell it what to do in that specific control loop. And of course, there's many different flows that your agent can go through. And that's the cool thing, right? There could be a retrieval-augmented generation flow, right? There could be something that is just doing function calls. There could be something that's doing multimodality. How do you deal with audio? How do you deal with images? How do you deal with PDFs? So your agent is smart enough in order to, within that control loop, to determine what to do. And this is where we start really getting into, as developers, how can we create business solutions for our customers, right? Maybe we want to create a document automation. Maybe you want to do a chatbot for support or for hospital, right? How do we optimize processes, et cetera? So this is where the business solutions come, is when these agents can organize and orchestrate a solution. The next big concept is MCP, and we hear it all the time. Nowadays, it's not actually that old. It's very, Anthropic is the ones that created it, is the concept of a model context protocol. And all it is basically the concept that an AI assistant or a host is going to call an MCP server with a specific request, and it's going to get a specific response. Now, the MCP server is going to expose three things: tools, resources, and prompts. Okay, those are the three things right now the model context protocol exposes. Now, how do we expose it? Well, there's two protocols within the model context protocol. You can do it via HTTP or HTTPS, or standard I/O. And standard I/O is basically just a pipe within an operating system. It doesn't go out through the internet. It's basically localized. Those are the two types of protocols that you can talk to a MCP server.